a retired K-9 suddenly leapt onto a school bus and refused to leave a silent little girl's side. Moments later, officers uncovered a hidden note that would shake an entire community. Here's what happened. But before we get into the story, drop a comment below. Let us know where you're watching from. It was supposed to be a normal morning, with the scent of toast lingering in the kitchen, the usual hum of buses echoing down the sleepy street, and Officer Lily Crane balancing her lukewarm coffee while reading the news on her phone. Scout, her retired canine partner, lay sprawled on the porch in a patch of sunlight, half asleep, one ear twitching lazily at the sound of passing cars. He hadn't worn a badge in over a year, traded high-stakes raids for belly rubs and long naps. His harness stored neatly in a trunk Lily never opened. But that morning, before Lily even noticed the bus pull up to the corner, Scout jolted upright. In one swift, fluid motion, he launched off the porch, tore through the side gate like it didn't exist, and was gone. Lily shouted, coffee spilling across her jeans, heart punching her ribs as she gave chase. But Scout was faster. He hit the bus just as the last child was stepping aboard, his paws thudding against the metal stairs, his growl deep and unfamiliar, ancient, the kind of sound that once made armed men drop their weapons. Screams echoed inside the bus as kids ducked and froze, the driver yelling, reaching for the radio. But Scout wasn't attacking. He was searching, his nose pressed to the floor, weaving through the rows, stopping briefly at each seat before moving on, tail stiff like a compass needle. Lily reached the doors just in time to see him halt beside a girl sitting near the back. Her knees pulled tight to her chest, her backpack clutched like armor. Mia. 7 years old, always alone, always quiet. And now locked in Scout's gaze like he saw something the rest of the world had missed. He let out a low, mournful whine, the kind of sound that breaks through bone and memory, and gently nudged her backpack with his nose. The driver shouted for him to get down. A teacher pulled at Mia's arm, but Lily raised a hand, voice calm, trained. Everyone stop. Let him work. Because she knew that look. Scout had found something, not a bomb, not a weapon, but something deeper, something just as dangerous. She stepped onto the bus slowly, crouched beside her old partner, and looked into the girl's trembling eyes. "It's okay, sweetheart," she said softly. "Can I see what's in your bag?" Mia didn't answer, just unzipped it with shaking hands. Inside, nestled between a snack pack and a library book, was a folded note, crayon letters on torn notebook paper, 5 words. "Please help me. He hurts." Lily's heart cracked open. Scout didn't move. He just sat beside Mia, eyes never leaving hers. He had broken every rule, jumped every fence, because somehow he knew. And now, everything about the day, the job, the mission, had just changed, forever. Mia was 7 years old and invisible, in the way that only the most hurting children can be. Always on time, never disruptive, and always sitting alone, as if she'd already learned that blending in was the safest way to survive. Her teachers noted her quietness, but never flagged concern. She wasn't failing her classes. She wasn't covered in bruises. She didn't flinch when spoken to or cry in the lunch line. She just drifted, silent and self-contained, like a candle trying not to draw wind. No one filed a report. No one asked the second question, until Scout chose her. The chaos that erupted after Scout jumped onto the bus felt like something from a training drill gone wrong. Radios blaring, the dispatcher's voice demanding status, teachers calling the station in a panic. Lily raced toward the scene, expecting broken glass or maybe a loose dogfight. But what she found instead was Scout, her loyal, battle-worn partner, sitting quietly beside a little girl with pigtails and wide, unblinking eyes. His tail didn't wag. His body was tense, but still. His eyes, however, were screaming. Not in fear, in pleading. He nudged the girl's backpack with his snout, then looked at Lily as if to say, Look closer. You're missing it. Mia held that backpack with both arms, a death grip of habit rather than defiance. But when Lily crouched down and asked gently, "Can I see inside, sweetheart?" she slowly unzipped it with trembling fingers. Crayons, a granola bar, a dog-eared notebook. And tucked between the pages, folded carefully like it was something sacred, was a note. The handwriting was childish, the crayon uneven, but the words hit harder than any report Lily had ever read. Please help me. He comes in my room at night. Just 10 words, yet they said everything. They said what Mia couldn't. Scout let out a soft huff and rested his head against the girl's leg, and for the first time since he had jumped the fence, Lily saw Mia's expression shift. She didn't cry, she didn't speak, but her hand slid gently across Scout's ears, as if grounding herself in something she didn't yet believe was real, safety. The rest of the day unfolded like a delicate operation. Lily took Mia to the precinct, made calls to child services, documented the note, and filed the first of what would become many statements. Through it all, Mia said almost nothing. Her voice was buried somewhere deep, but Scout stayed beside her the entire time, guarding, not just from danger, but from the silence that had wrapped itself around her like chains. And as night fell, and Scout curled at her feet in the quiet room of the Child Advocacy Center, Lily stood outside the door, watching them both through the glass. A girl who didn't speak. A dog who couldn't. And somehow together, they'd told the world what it needed to hear. Scout hadn't just found a note, he'd found a child who had given up on being heard. And in doing so, he reminded everyone what real listening looks like. Lily scanned the note again and again, her hands trembling slightly as if the crayon marks might rearrange themselves into something easier to swallow. Please help me. He comes in my room at night. 10 words that cracked something open deep inside her. Something not even the academy or all those years in uniform could prepare her for. There were no names, no direct accusations, just the echo of a cry that had waited too long to be heard. The room around her felt suddenly colder, the hum of the overhead lights too loud, the silence between Scout's breaths too thick. Scout paced the floor of the precinct office like a sentinel, his nose low, tail straight, circling back to Mia's backpack again and again. Lily didn't have to ask what he was doing. She remembered. She remembered the training drills, the scent exercises, the precision with which Scout could trace a drop of fear across a crowded crime scene. But this was something else. This wasn't about drugs or bombs. This was about what couldn't be seen, what clung to the skin, what soaked into the fabric of a child's clothes when terror became a routine. Dogs like Scout could smell it, the hormone, cortisol, released by the body in the waves of fear and stress. People wore it like invisible ink, and Scout was reading it line by line. He wasn't following a scent of blood. He was following sorrow, the kind that saturated everything, her shoes, her backpack, even the paper the note was written on. Scout sniffed the page once, whined low, and looked up at Lily like he'd just heard the whisper of something too awful to repeat. Lily crouched down beside him, brushed a hand through the gray around his muzzle, and whispered, "You're not retired anymore, are you, boy?" Scout didn't move, didn't blink. His silence was answer enough. They were back on duty, not with guns or warrants, but with something more vital: truth. Lily walked down the hall to the Child Advocacy Center where Mia sat, curled in a chair, hugging a pillow too tightly for comfort. The counselor beside her was speaking gently, but Mia's eyes drifted toward the window, unfocused, distant, like she had learned to live outside herself. Lily knocked softly on the doorframe. "Mia," she said, kneeling down, "Scout wants to stay with you a little longer. Is that okay?" Mia looked at her, really looked for the first time. Then, without a word, she nodded. Scout stepped inside, curled up beside the girl's chair, and rested his head on her foot. The room was quiet again, but not hollow. It felt like the first exhale after too long underwater. Lily stepped back, watching the two of them, and understood in that moment what the badge had never taught her. Some cases don't start with evidence. They start with instinct. With a dog who smelled sadness no one else could. And a child who finally wasn't alone. They brought Mia home just before sunset. the sky painted in soft golds that didn't match the weight in Lily's chest. The house was picture perfect, the kind you'd see in a brochure. Painted shutters, trimmed hedges, a welcome mat that read Family First in cheerful script. Inside, the scent of fresh flowers filled the air. Lilacs, maybe, too strong, like it was trying to cover something else. The kitchen was spotless, every counter gleaming, and there were drawings pinned neatly to the fridge with smiling stick figures. But none of them had Mia's name on them. Scout stepped inside first, cautious, nose twitching, tail stiff as a wire. Mia clutched Lily's hand tighter than before, her small fingers digging into the officer's palm, not saying a word but communicating everything with that grip. Then he appeared, the stepfather. Tall, well-groomed, sleeves rolled to the elbow, a clean apron still tied around his waist like he'd just finished preparing dinner for a family that didn't exist. His smile was wide, too wide, the kind of smile that came from someone who knew how to perform safety without ever offering it. "Hey there," he said, voice smooth as syrup, crouching slightly to Mia's level. "You gave us a real scare, kiddo." But Scout didn't move. His body froze, his gaze locked on the man like a laser sight. Then came the growl, deep, guttural, not a warning but a verdict. The stepfather laughed it off, made a joke about bacon in his pockets, but Lily didn't laugh. She watched the way his hand settled on Mia's shoulder, fingers squeezing a moment too long. How he answered every question Lily directed toward the girl before Mia could open her mouth. She watched the way he kept trying to move between them. His body language all wrong, too eager, too rehearsed. Scout moved forward, slow and deliberate, and placed himself between Mia and the man, his back legs set, his chest puffed out like a shield. He didn't bark. He didn't need to. His presence was a line in the sand. "He doesn't usually act like this," Lily said flatly, eyes never leaving the man. "He's well trained. Protective, yes, but only when something feels off." The man chuckled again, but this time it was thinner, the edge of it brittle. "Must be picking up on my nerves," he said. "All this fuss, all these questions, she's just a quiet kid, you know?" But Lily wasn't listening anymore. She was watching Mia, who now stood half behind Scout, head low, her hand gently resting on his back. Not clinging, just touching, like she finally had something solid to lean on. That night after they left, Lily couldn't sleep. She lay in bed with her uniform still folded at the foot, the crayon note tucked beneath her pillow, the image of that house flickering behind her eyes. Scout paced the floor instead of resting, his nose twitching every few minutes, as if still sorting through the layers of deception. Home isn't always safe. Sometimes it's the most dangerous place of all. And tonight they both knew they'd just walked straight into the heart of it. Scout returned to Mia's house the next morning under the official pretense of a wellness check. But Lily knew better. He hadn't rested all night, pacing the living room floor with the same restless energy he used to carry before a raid. His instincts were screaming. And Lily had learned a long time ago that ignoring Scout was the fastest way to miss the truth. The stepfather answered the door with that same syrupy smile, stepping aside too easily, too ready, like a man confident the mask was still holding. "Back so soon?" he asked, eyes flicking briefly to Scout, whose hackles were already raised. "Just tying up a few loose ends," Lily replied, voice calm but cold. Scout didn't pause in the foyer. He moved straight through the kitchen, bypassed the living room, and pushed open the back door with his snout before trotting into the yard like he'd already mapped the place in his mind. Lily followed in silence as Scout crossed the lawn, nose low, tail rigid. He moved past the sandbox, past the old swing set, and straight to the overgrown corner behind the shed, where the grass grew higher and the soil looked like it had been disturbed. Without hesitation, Scout began to dig. The dirt flew fast, small clouds kicking up as his paws struck the earth, and then he stopped. Whined. Lily knelt beside him and reached down into the shallow hole, her fingers brushing something cold, a tin box. She pulled it out and opened it slowly. Inside were tiny plastic toys. Dinosaurs, a Barbie shoe, a broken action figure, mixed in with folded scraps of paper covered in uneven handwriting. Crayon drawings of sad faces, stick figures behind bars. and one terrifying message, scrawled in jagged, looping letters. He says no one will believe me. Lily's stomach turned. Nestled between the drawings was a small pink hair clip snapped in half, its jagged edges sharp like a wound that never healed. Scout let out another soft whimper and turned his head toward the house, eyes locked on the back door. Lily stood, heart hammering, and followed his gaze. The door's latch was old, rusted, the screws stripped and reinserted more than once. It had been broken, repaired, broken again. A cycle. Not an accident, not wear and tear. Control, a subtle kind of violence. Lily took a photo of the latch, then the box, sealed everything in an evidence bag, and walked back inside with Scout pressed close to her leg. The stepfather raised an eyebrow as she returned. "Find something interesting?" he asked too casually. Lily didn't respond, not yet, but her eyes said it all. The signs had always been there, the drawings, the repairs, the silence. They'd just been hiding beneath a coat of flowers and forced smiles. The reports hadn't caught up yet, but they would. Because Scout had found what no one else had dared to look for, and this time they weren't leaving without answers. Lily returned the next morning with a signed warrant tucked tightly in her vest, her badge clipped, her jaw set like steel. The sun was barely over the rooftops when she stepped out of the cruiser, Scout already at her side, tail straight, muscles tense like he knew what was waiting. There was no room for pleasantries this time, no forced smiles, no morning coffee chat at the door. The stepfather opened it with a weak laugh, eyes flicking from the paper in Lily's hand to the leash in hers. "Warrant," he said, trying to sound amused. "You think I'm hiding something?" Lily didn't answer. She didn't have to. Scout was already moving, nose low, sniffing the baseboards, the door frames, the air itself. He didn't go upstairs, didn't circle the kitchen. He headed for the basement door and sat in front of it without a sound, his body heavy with purpose. Lily reached for the knob, locked. "We'll need that key," she said quietly. The stepfather hesitated just a second too long, his face twitching with something ugly. That was all she needed, a nod to her backup, and the lock was popped with a pry tool. The basement stairs groaned underfoot as Lily and Scout descended, dust motes hanging in the air like suspended truths. It was cold down there, unnaturally cold, and the smell was thick with mildew and something metallic beneath it, something that didn't belong. Scout's pace slowed, his ears pinned back, and then he stopped in front of another door, this one even older, bolted shut from the outside. Lily's stomach turned. She pulled her flashlight, gave the bolt a sharp twist, and opened the door to darkness. Her beam cut across the room, revealing a concrete floor, a stained mattress pushed against the far wall, a single dangling bulb above it. A small camera sat in the corner, its lens cracked, the red light dead but unmistakable. Piles of clothes lay in a heap, child-sized, a bracelet, a pink sock, a Hello Kitty hoodie. Scout stepped inside, his growl rising low and lethal, a sound that came from a place far deeper than duty. It wasn't just about scent now. It was memory, echo, proof. The stepfather stood at the top of the stairs, eyes blank, jaw clenched. He didn't run, didn't shout. He just froze as the mask peeled from his face, one layer at a time. When Lily came back up and read him his rights, his hands didn't resist the cuffs. But his silence, his hollow practice songs, spoke louder than any denial. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't ask about Mia. He just stared through her, as if trying to find a version of himself that wasn't already collapsing under the weight of the truth. Outside, Scout sat beside the cruiser, watching the front door, chest heaving. He didn't bark when they brought the man out. He didn't need to. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it watched. Sometimes it waited. And sometimes it walked straight into the dark and dragged the secrets back into the light. The room was dim, quiet. The soft hum of a white noise machine blending with the rhythmic tick of the clock on the wall. Mia lay beneath a comforter patterned with stars and moons, her tiny frame still against the mattress as if her body was relearning how to rest. The glow from the nightlight painted gentle arcs across her face, revealing features no longer tight with fear, but relaxed in the innocent sleep should have always offered her. It had taken nearly an hour for her to drift off, clutching the stuffed bear Lily had given her, fingers tangled in the edge of the blanket, like she didn't quite trust it to stay. But she had fallen asleep, deeply, quietly, for the first time in what was likely months, maybe more. No shadows pacing outside her door. No creaking floorboards that weren't hers, no whispers with hands. Just silence. The good kind. The healing kind. And curled at the base of her bed was Scout, his body pressed against the frame, ears twitching at every sound, nose flaring occasionally, but his eyes closed. He didn't snore. He didn't move. But he was there, a silent wall of fur and muscle and memory, standing between Mia and the world that had failed her. Lily stood in the hallway, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed loosely, watching the two of them like a moment she didn't want to disturb. She hadn't planned to stay the night, but something in her refused to leave. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was guilt, maybe it was the unspoken bond forming in the quiet spaces where words couldn't reach. She saw Mia shift slightly in her sleep, one arm stretching out beneath the covers, her fingers brushing the floor near Scout's back. And then, half conscious, half dreaming, Mia whispered so softly Lily almost missed it. "You're my hero." Scout didn't lift his head, didn't make a sound, but his tail gave one slow wag, a small ripple of acknowledgement, and Lily felt something lodge itself in her throat. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was enough to know that the worst was behind them. That whatever came next, counselors, interviews, healing, it would be faced with truth on their side. Because the first step had already been taken. The silence had been broken. And the girl who hadn't spoken now had a voice, even if it came out in whispers, even if it needed four legs beside her to feel safe enough to speak. Lily pushed off the frame, stepped away quietly, and let the moment settle like dust in sunlight. Behind her, Scout continued to stand guard, not as a warrior this time, but as a witness. And Mia slept on, wrapped in a peace she had almost forgotten was real. In that room, nothing moved, nothing threatened, because a little girl had finally found safety, and a retired dog had once again found purpose. When the story hit the news, it cracked something open that had been sealed tight for too long. The anchor's voice was calm, polished, but the words carried weight as they described how a retired canine broke protocol to board a school bus, how he found a note in a quiet girl's backpack, how that note led to a basement no child should have ever seen. The town had prided itself on safety, on neighborly charm, on porch lights and bake sales and community boards filled with cheerful reminders. But all it took was one broadcast, one camera pointed at the truth, for that shiny surface to splinter. Neighbors had wondered. They'd noticed the odd schedule, the way Mia never made eye contact, the too silent yard behind the house with the always closed curtains. Some had heard shouting late at night, chalked it up to stress. Others had seen Mia flinch at loud noises, pass it off as shyness. But no one asked. No one looked deeper. Until a dog did. Now the truth was inescapable. The interviews played on loop. Officer Lily Crane standing at the edge of the school parking lot, microphone inches from her face, camera lights bright enough to show the exhaustion in her eyes. She didn't give the typical statement. She didn't hide behind procedure. Scout was retired, she said, voice firm but edged with something raw. He was supposed to be done. But instinct doesn't retire. Loyalty doesn't expire. That dog smelled fear wrapped in silence and did what no adult in this town had done. He acted. Behind her, Scout sat calmly, flanked by officers who now looked at him with something close to reverence. He didn't bark. He didn't move. But his eyes never left Lily. She continued, her words slicing clean. We all saw pieces. We all had chances, teachers, neighbors, friends. But we missed them. Or worse, we ignored them. It shouldn't take a dog to call out what we should have noticed first. The footage spread fast, shared, reposted, clipped for social feeds. Comment sections filled with apologies, outrage, support. But beneath all the noise, was a collective ache, a town that had to look in the mirror and admit it had failed a child by choosing comfort over confrontation. That evening, a group of students held a candlelight vigil outside the school, not just for Mia, but for all the times their voices had been quieted. One little boy held a sign that read, "Thank you, Scout, for listening." And across the street, an elderly woman stood with tears in her eyes, whispering, "We should have known. We should have asked." The town changed that night. The school installed new protocols. Teachers went through mandatory training. Neighborhood watch groups began knocking on doors, not just for safety, but for connection. And in the center of it all was a dog who had once served overseas, who had chased criminals and sniffed out bombs. Yet his most important mission had come on a quiet morning, on a school bus, beside a child no one had dared to see. Scout didn't chase headlines. He chased truth. And this time, it changed everything. Scout started slowing down weeks after the arrest, his once effortless stride now stiff with every step, joints creaking like old hinges worn thin by years of unspoken weight. His ears, once razor sharp, barely twitched at distant footsteps. The world, once alive with scents and signals, began to soften at the edges. But none of it dulled the presence he carried, because to everyone who knew, Scout wasn't just a dog anymore. He was a symbol, a sentinel, a living reminder of what it meant to pay attention when others looked away. Lily noticed the changes first, the longer naps, the way he struggled to rise when the doorbell rang, the slower flick of his tail when her patrol boots hit the floor. And she knew he'd given everything, not just in war zones, or alleys or crowded streets, but in that school bus, in that basement, in the long hours between instincts and justice. He had given all he had left. Then one quiet afternoon, the station door creaked open and Mia stepped in. She was different now. Her hair was longer, her clothes brighter, her eyes no longer haunted. She walked with a tentative kind of lightness, like someone learning what it meant to feel safe. In her hand was a folded piece of paper, carefully held like a gift. Scout was lying near the desk, his head resting on his paws, eyes half closed. But when Mia spoke his name, just once, soft and certain, his ears perked. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed himself up. Every muscle protested, but he moved. He crossed the floor without hesitation, as if time hadn't frayed his body, as if this was one last command his soul couldn't ignore. Mia knelt and held out the note. Not crayon this time, pencil, neat, strong. Scout leaned forward, nose touching the corner of the page before gently nudging it from her fingers. She smiled. "It's not a cry for help," she whispered. "It's a thank you." Scout's tail moved once, slow and sure, a flicker of pride that made Lily's throat tighten. The note read, "You heard me when no one did. I'm brave now because of you." He hadn't passed any more tests. He hadn't returned to duty. But in that moment, Scout stood taller than any uniformed officer in the room. He had completed his final mission. Not for glory, not for medals, but for the only thing that ever truly mattered. A child who now had her voice. A girl who now had her life. Lily watched the two of them, past and future, soldier and survivor, bound by something stronger than training. And as Scout lay back down, Mia rested a hand on his back, fingers sinking into his fur like roots into earth. It wasn't goodbye. Not yet. But it was enough for him to rest, enough for her to rise, and in the silence that followed, nothing more needed to be said. Because a hero doesn't always march. Sometimes he just listens and then lets go. Mia healed slowly, the way cracked things do, not in one loud moment, but in tiny, invisible stitches pulled together by time, patience, and safety. The girl who once curled into corners now stood tall in classroom presentations, reading aloud the stories she wrote in spiral notebooks covered with stars and stickers. Her heroes didn't wear capes or ride horses. They had paws, scars, and eyes that could see straight through the dark. Scout appeared in every page, always silent, always strong, always arriving the second someone's voice got too quiet to hear. He had become more than her savior. He was her compass, her proof that being small didn't mean being invisible. Word spread slowly and then all at once. Someone posted Mia's story to a community board, and the post traveled farther than anyone expected. Messages poured in from parents, teachers, officers, survivors, people who had once needed someone to listen. And in the middle of it all was one photo. Scout, sitting proud beside Mia, both of them bathed in afternoon light, their silhouettes cast long across the precinct steps. The school board approved the mural in under a week. Students painted it during art class, and local artists came to help outline the expression. Scout with his nose to the wind, ears alert, eyes both fierce and gentle. He didn't look like a cartoon. He looked like a protector. The kind of soul that didn't ask for permission to do the right thing. Beneath the mural, a brass plaque was mounted in stone. It read, "To the dog who listened when no one else could." And every morning, students passed by it on their way through the school doors. Some paused, some touched the wall, and every single one of them knew who Scout was. Back at Lily's home, life slowed in rhythm with Scout's heartbeat. He didn't chase squirrels anymore. He didn't patrol the yard. He slept a lot, stretched out in his favorite patch of sun by the front porch. His breathing steady, his eyes half closed like he was finally letting the world spin without him for a while. Lily would sit beside him some evenings, sipping coffee gone cold, watching the way the light settled across his silver fur. She never said much, neither did he. But they didn't need to. The silence between them was full of everything they'd been through: gunfire, broken glass, whispered cries in the dark, and one school bus morning that changed everything. There was no parade for Scout, no confetti or blaring horns, just the sound of wind in the trees, a soft exhale of peace, and the little girl's laughter echoing from down the street. Because true heroes don't need noise to leave a mark. They just need to show up when no one else will. And Scout did, quietly, fiercely, completely. Subscribe to Honor the K9s who keep listening long after the world tells them their job is done. Because sometimes the softest ears catch the loudest cries. And sometimes the bravest thing a dog can do is simply not walk away.